Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our second full meeting. Not the launch, of course, was the third then. I just wanted to share with you a story about Miss Donathon, as you're going to hear about it. Most people think that Randolph Stowe said to Max, let's do something funny. But actually, there's a better story behind that because when he was in Australia in 1974, he was interviewed by Hazel de Berg, and he actually said that they were at a party and, quote, Stowe saw, I think it was Joan Sutherland and Richard Bonning, her husband, at the party afterwards and said, why don't you write a mad work for Joan Sutherland? Ha ha ha.
Thanks, Richard. I think Miss Donathon would be a very different work if it was written for Joan Sutherland, wouldn't it? Welcome everybody. Thank you, Richard. We've got two speakers this afternoon, both of whom will be talking about how they approach different works by Max from a performer's point of view. And so therefore, I'd really like to welcome and introduce to you Alison Wells and Simon Butterworth. Lovely to see you both, and thank you so much for agreeing to contribute today. And so both Simon and Alison will speak for approximately 25 minutes or so, and Simon will be first up and followed straight after by Alison, and I will introduce both before they speak. I think we're all sort of veterans of Zoom by now, but please do ensure that your microphones are switched off when both Simon and Alison are speaking. And once both speakers are finished, I will then open the floor to questions. So if you'd like to ask a question, then please raise your hand or give me a little wave or something, or indeed write in the chat function at the bottom of the screen that you'd like to ask a question. Okay, let's make a start then. So Simon Butterworth studied at the Royal Academy of Music in the late 1970s and early 80s. In 1981, he became a freelance clarinet player and worked with a number of UK orchestras. In 1988, he became principal bass clarinet with the BBC Philharmonic Orchestra, a position he held until 2003. In the same year, he became principal bass clarinet with the BBC Scottish Symphony Orchestra, a position he still holds. And Simon is also a very talented landscape photographer as well, and he actually contributed a photograph in this book here, and I hope you can see that. That's Max's Croft in Orkney. So we used that in this book. So you obviously won't be talking about that, but I thought that'd be a nice little thing to share. So thank you, Simon. Over to you.
Well, before I start, can everybody hear me okay? Am I loud enough? I'm going to apologize for vagueness with dates. This is deliberate, so I didn't have to do too much fact checking. And any facts I get wrong along the way, I apologize to people and anybody who have missed out of this. I'm going to basically talk about what it was like to work with Max. When I joined the Philharmonic in 1988, Max was composer in residence, or very shortly after me starting at the Philharmonic. So basically I saw him about 1 week in 4 in Manchester for 10 years. So during that time, and I think he was kind of emeritus composer in residence afterwards. So basically my whole career, in a way, since I've been a member of the two orchestras, has been intertwined with Max in one way or another, because in Scotland he had a lot of connections with the Scottish Symphony Orchestra, and both orchestras, both the Philharmonic and the Scottish Symphony, played every 3 years. We rotated on a 3-yearly basis, or 4-yearly, latterly, I think, at the St Magnus Festival. And I'm going to start with my first trip as a member of the BBC Philharmonic to the St Magnus Festival, which was around 1988. It could have been 89, I'm not sure. Now, when the orchestra went up there with 80, 90 players, particularly for big works like Max's stuff, we did Black Pentecost, which was a big orchestra. Various people got farmed out with families because there wasn't enough accommodation in Orkney. So I ended up being farmed out to a family called the Johnsons in Stromness. Dr. Derek Johnson and Susie Johnson, who were the nicest, most remarkable people. They'd both been doctors in Stromness. The surgery was attached to their house, which was along the seafront in Stromness. They had connections. In fact, everybody knew the Johnsons, everybody. All I had to do anywhere in Orkney was say I'm staying with the Johnsons, and they say, oh, I'll give them my regards. So Derek Johnson owned the Muckle House on Hoy, which is the next door croft to Bunatoon, where Max lived when he was on Hoy up till, I think, 98. And I believe when Max first went to Orkney, he was given use of the Muckle House and he worked on the Devils there. So there was a connection straight away. And I stayed with the Johnsons and I got on, I don't think you couldn't not get on with them. And it was interesting because every morning George Mackay Brown would walk along the seafront in Stromness and sit on the seat outside the Johnsons' house. He had no significance to me at that time, so I didn't take a lot of notice, and everybody treated him just like anybody else in the town. And every single day would walk along the seafront to the cannon outside the Johnsons' house, which looked out across the Sound, and sit and contemplate for 20 minutes. Anyway, while I was staying there, the Johnsons basically gave me free run of the Muckle House, said I could go up there whenever I fancied it. So I thought, great, what could be better? So I came back home, and Lauren, my partner, we went up there for a holiday, and we stayed in the Muckle House. It's just one field below Bunatoon. It's literally 2 minutes walk from, it's the nearest neighbour to Max. When we got up there to the Muckle House, the composer's course was going on, and it was halfway through. So I didn't know Max well at this time. He very magnanimously included me in all the social events, which I'm sure anybody who's been remembers. Wild nights in the Hoy Inn, and there was a fantastic last night party up at Bunatoon, where the Muckle House was in two parts. The other part, a chap called David Hutchinson lived there, who looked after Bunatoon when Max was away. So we spent a lovely week up at Bunatoon, and got to know Max much better. I remember when the composers had gone home, he invited me and Lauren up for a meal, pasta and lots of wine, which I don't think he ever gave me anything else. And I remember very well sitting in the kitchen in Bunatoon, which was just basically a croft with one room on each side of the front door. There was a kitchen and the living room living room? Well, it contained a bed, a traditional Orkney box bed, which is set in the wall with curtains across. And then at the small window looking out across Rackwick Bay was his working desk with all his writing equipment. I remember it was covered in little skeletons of animals and birds he picked up on the beach. And in the corner was the portative organ that he must have played for. And apart from that, it was very sparse. There wasn't really much there, I suppose, in keeping with Orkney tradition. And I remember when this particular occasion when I went up with Lauren, he had the big wind-up gramophone that became so famous, was on the kitchen table, and he played foxtrot records while we drank wine, which was an incredible experience, because I'd been doing St. Thomas Wake, which has the foxtrot that they played on a wind-up gramophone during the Blitz in Manchester while the bombs were raining down. So that was a fascinating experience. I think the next day, me and Lauren walked across to the Old Man of Hoy. Max's place was the nearest habitation to the Old Man of Hoy. And he insisted when we walked across that we take his dog, I think it was called Lady, that particular model, that we take the dog because the skewers that patrol that area of moorland dive bomb you. Sometimes they'll grab your head as they fly overhead, and with the dog running ahead, they go for that instead and leave you alone. So he insisted we take the dog for that purpose, which I thought was really nice. Anyway, to move on, I think probably a really important event in the way things happened with the BBC Philharmonic was we played regularly at the Royal Northern College of Music, which was just up the road from the BBC studios where the Philharmonic were based. We did a concert with him, he was conducting, and afterwards there was a Ceilidh band. The orchestra had a Ceilidh band, just loosely based of people who enjoyed playing folk music, and they'd been asked to play in the foyer for anyway. When Max was leaving, he heard the Ceilidh band and he was fascinated, and he stood and watched it until they finished. And looking back now, the 5 people who made up the rotary in the Ceilidh band all had pieces written for them by him in the orchestra. I think possibly the most significant one was Beltane Fire, which was for orchestra with a group of kind of episodes of folk music with folk violin, clarinet, and Boron, which were Julian Gregory played the violin, Clifford Lantaff was the orchestra harpist, he played the clarinet, and Rob Lee played the Boron. He was a very accomplished Boron player. And Max wrote that for those 3. We premiered Beltane Fire in Boston Symphony Hall in 1995, which was a really interesting gig. I mean, they'd never heard anything like it in Boston at that time. Especially, I remember we did a huge tour of the United States. It was in the days when you went on where plane tickets were expensive enough that when you got somewhere, you stayed there to make some money to pay for it. So we did coast to coast over a month in the States with Max and Jean-Pascal Tortelier alternating gigs. Max largely conducting his own stuff. So I remember in Symphony Hall in Boston at the end of Beltane Fire, where the fire gets put out by heavy rain, which was crinkling. We all crinkled plastic egg boxes to simulate the rain coming down on the fire. And I remember rushing around Boston trying to find egg boxes on the late afternoon of the premiere. But it was a great success. That piece, Beltane Fire, was, I think, nominated for a Mercury Music Award that year in the classical section. It didn't win, unfortunately, but it was also performed in the proms that year, I think. So that was part of the Cayley band. The other two instruments in the Cayley band were flute or whistle and Northumbrian pipes. Now, the Northumbrian pipe player was Mark Jordan, who he wrote Cross Lane Fair for. I don't know whether anybody's seen that live, but Mark dressed up as in a mannequin outfit and juggled in the Bar's Rest, and he played the solo part on the pipes, and the piece ended while the last chord was playing. He threw one of the balls right up to the roof and caught it on his head or something, and we did that piece. I remember on the same tour, we played that in Las Vegas at Las Vegas University. Again, they'd never seen anything like it. And of course, the stay in Las Vegas, we were there for a few days. It was a famous Mavis in Las Vegas incident. I don't know whether anybody knows about that, where a journalist tried to get hold of Max to interview him and couldn't get him in the hotel. He said, "There's nobody by that name here. We've only got Mavis Davis," which he thought was hilarious. So he wrote the piece Mavis in Las Vegas, which was a kind of pastiche of all the atmospheric stuff of Las Vegas. I remember when we were there, all he wanted to do was go to the Liberace Museum. You know, the rest of us were thinking we'll get a helicopter down the Grand Canyon and stuff like that. And Max he was focused on the Liberace Museum. So when he wrote Mavis, it's largely in C major, because he was taken with the fact that all the slot machines in the casinos were in C major, which, it would have been cacophonous if they were all in a different key. So the Mavis is largely parodies this in C major, and it was the first time he wrote a solo for me on the tenor saxophone in again a kind of parody in Mavis, which was the first time he'd ever written for the saxophone, which was interesting, because he'd become interested in the saxophone at the Philharmonic, because he conducted, probably, it must have been quite early 90s, he conducted Vaughan Williams' Sixth Symphony. I think he always liked Vaughan Williams, and I think he particularly liked the Sixth Symphony. And in the bass clarinet part in the Sixth Symphony, the third movement moves over to tenor sax. It's a great tenor sax part, really well written. And I always like to do both parts. So I put the bass clarinet down, pick up the tenor sax for the third movement, then back to bass clarinet. And he was kind of interested in the saxophone. He said he knew nothing about it. And we talked about it quite a lot. And I think that then seeded the idea in his mind. He wanted to know more about the saxophone. So he said to me at some stage, I've got a friend in the States who's just written a saxophone concerto, and this was Ronald Caltabiano. I don't know whether anybody knows him. So he said, why don't we do it with the orchestra? So I said, yeah, that would be great. I think maybe in about 95, 96 probably, or maybe later, a bit later, we played the Caltabiano saxophone concerto with the BBC Philharmonic at the Royal Northern College of Music, which was it was very, very difficult, but I think it went okay, and that set in the train of thought in his mind that he would like to write a saxophone piece. So he said, would I like to play a saxophone piece if he wrote one? So, I mean, you don't turn things like that down. So I said, yeah, great. Please, could it be for alto, not tenor? I find playing the tenor in the orchestra, it just seems really unwieldy, actually. So he said, yes, we'd do it for alto sax. Anyway, I didn't hear anything for a long time. He was obviously mulling it over. And it got to the point where I think in late 1999 that it was advertised, the premiere was advertised at Warwick University. I think it's called Butterworth Hall, funnily enough, at Warwick University for late January 2000. And I still hadn't got the music. And I started to get a bit worried about this. And it was after Christmas 1999 that it, with 3 weeks to the premiere, that it landed with a thud on my doormat in Lancashire where we lived, and it was incredibly difficult. He was particularly interested in the very high register, the harmonics. So he really explored that. I think that he wanted to use the harmonics melodically rather than just using them as a stunt in a cadenza, as Ebert did in Concerto da Camera, where he kind of puts the odd very high note in as a look what I can do thing. Max wanted it to be used melodically, so he wrote these incredibly high notes, all of which I had to make the fingerings up, and luckily the orchestra gave me leave for that 3 weeks. All I did for about 6 hours a day was practice it. And we did the premiere, and it went really well. And we subsequently performed that piece on quite a few times in Manchester. We did it in Orkney. We recorded it for Radio 3. So my hard work did pay off in the end with 4 or 5 performances of it. So that was the saxophone piece. And then the next piece he wrote was he started to chat about could the bass clarinet be used as a solo instrument, that he didn't really know anything of it being used as a solo instrument. So I said, yeah, I'm sure it could. And I think because there are lots of, again, harking back to the Vaughan Williams, there are lots of solos, particularly at the end of the Vaughan Williams 6 for bass clarinet. And I think this had been mulling over in his mind all the time. So he said, would I like to do a piece for solo bass clarinet? And I said, I would love to do it. Add something to the repertoire. So again, I didn't hear anything for a few years, and I left the BBC Philharmonic and moved to Scotland. And then he contacted me and said, it's finished. We've put it in Orkney in 2007. So that was the C's of Kirk's-Swarth, which I found this copy this morning of the Seas of Kirk's-Swarth, which I was just showing to Nick before we started, which is the full score in his hand that he sent me, that I used to learn the notes before. And this is the, I don't know whether you can see this. This is his beautiful copperplate handwriting on the. Would you like me to just read out what he's written at the beginning? He's put the Seas of Kirk's-Swarth, Peter Maxwell Davies, April 2007 for bass clarinet and strings for Simon Butterworth and the BBC Scottish Symphony Orchestra. And he's put, Kirk's-Swarth is a stretch of sea off the Homes of Ire, 2 small uninhabited islands off Sanday, Orkney, where I live. As the name suggests, on shore is a ruined chapel. The Old Norse swarth means tumult. 2 kinds of sea meet here and interact. The wilder sea from Westray to the west, and a calmer sea east facing North Ronaldsay. Great shelves extend under the sea, resulting in huge waves suddenly rearing up, even on calm days, with extraordinary dramatic effect. And I'll just show you some of his lovely writing. Now, I was saying to Nick, I don't know whether this is a copy or not, because it's in pencil and it looks very much like pencil to me, but I don't know. So this is his handwriting on the score. It's all very neat, very legible. In fact, I use this part until it was published. So that was, I don't know whether anybody's heard that piece. It has been broadcast on Radio 3 2 or 3 times, but it was, I kind of detected a big change in Max's writing style at this stage. That it had become much more lyrical, the string writing. It had lost that angular drama that was so characteristic of his music for so long. And I could taste Finzi in the string writing when we did this. It was this kind of beautiful English lyrical style, and you know, it was kind of Max getting older, I think, but a very, very lovely piece and terrifically well written for the bass clarinet as well. Perfect bass clarinet writing, really. Now that covers loosely the pieces that I. Oh, I was just going to say, and go back to the Cayley band in Manchester. The 5th person, the flute player, Stuart McElwan, was the recipient of the PMD Piccolo Concerto. So that made up the full 5 members of the Cayley band. All had solo pieces written for them. Stuart was left the Philharmonic in the early 90s, and when he gave the premiere of this, I think it was at the Festival Hall with the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra, the Piccolo Concerto. I went down for it. It was really an exciting evening. Stuart McElwan his father was tied up with Max in a way, because when they played, I think it was the BBC Symphony Orchestra played Orkney Wedding with Sunrise in the last night of the proms, Stuart's father was piper on that occasion when he walked down the steps from the through the stalls, and Stuart's father George was also piccolo player in the orchestra I'm in now for about 30 or 40 years, and he was a good composer in his own right. So there was a big connection right through with Max. Do you want me to carry on with, or I can stop there? I've got a few anecdotes together. that you might find interesting.
No, Simon. I think could we save those anecdotes for the end by the question?
Yes, sure.
Yeah,
sure.
I think time is against us at the moment.
Yeah, that took a lot longer than I ever.
No, no, it's been really fascinating to hear those lovely memories of Max, and if we could continue that later on, that'd be
sure.
superb. Hey, thank you so much for that. Now we'll move. Oh yes, we've got some claps there. Wonderful. Thank you again. So we'll move on to. I'll just put my specs back on so I can see what I'm doing. To Alison. So Alison Wells is a mezzo-soprano, and she originally trained as a pianist before becoming a singer. And a large part of her work is in the field of contemporary music. And she has worked with leading ensembles in the UK and Europe. And she's broadcast extensively for BBC Radio 3. And Alison has given a number of performances of new works. And she has given performances of Miss Donnithorne's Maggot in London, in Oxford, and of course in Orkney to great acclaim. She's recorded a wide variety of music, and in 2012 she made a DVD of Miss Donnithorne, which was reviewed enthusiastically on Radio 3's CD Review and of course in the Opera magazine. So she's in great demand as a teacher of singing, and she's currently a professor in the vocal and opera department of the Royal College of Music, as well as having a large private studio. Before I hand over to Alison, she's asked me to make sure that you enable your original sound on Zoom, which is, she tells me, is accessible at the top left-hand side of the screen. So I think I'll hand over to you, Alison, to explain that a little bit more. Is that okay? Thank you.
That's fine. Can you all hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, good. That's great. Yes, just because actually what I'm going to do is demonstrate some of the vocal writing of Miss Donnithorne live. And if you haven't got original sound on, it may well cut off your receiving equipment, might just say that's too loud and cut me off. So if anybody can't find it, you might find the settings for it in audio settings, which are along the bottom left. And that should bring up a dialog box on the top left, which says turn on or turn off original sound. So you need to press turn on, and hopefully it will be okay. But do let me know if there's any problems. So I hope that's okay. And I'm going to be screen sharing in a little while, but not immediately. So Simon, thanks so much for that insight into wonderful, the character of Max. I think you told us an awful lot. It was really, really fascinating. I'm really grateful to Nick and Richard for asking me to talk to you today about Donnithorne, and I wanted to explore how I prepared the role and what was I looking for. And I first sang it in 2010, so that's some time ago. And it's been such a huge pleasure for me to go back and revisit this score and look at it and wonder, would I do things differently? And how did my performance change over the several that I have done? So I was really thrilled when Ian Mitchell, who's with us today, the director of Gemini, asked me to sing Miss Donnithorne at King's Place for a mini festival about Max. I'm just going to put myself on speaker view. I'm on speaker view, that's right, sorry. And to do the opportunity to do this piece, which I'd always loved, was such a thrill for me to get to grips with a great ensemble and great colleagues. I had read about the work and I knew about the genesis of the piece, including the story that Richard told us, although I didn't know the Joan Sutherland bit of it. Max actually writes in the foreword of the score that it was at the party after the first performance of 8 songs from Mad King in 1969, a piece, as we know, that was a tremendous success immediately. Randolph Stowe, the librettist for that piece and for Donnithorne, did say to Max, let's write a funny one as a sequel. Max, in his foreword, goes on to say, Donnithorne was born 5 years later, and her music is more introvert, more contemplative, and I would think ultimately more disturbing than that written for George III, the Mad King, and certainly only funny in a most qualified manner. From my own point of view, I'd always felt a great sympathy for the character of Eliza Donnithorne. And like other performers, notably, of course, Mary Thomas, who created the role, and the late lamented Jane Manning, who gave many performances, I wanted very much to find the multifaceted nature of her character. Miss Donnithorne certainly behaves in a very funny manner sometimes, but that behaviour is stemming from this great tragedy in her life. And I wanted to explore how I could interpret what Max had written so brilliantly and wonderfully and imaginatively to achieve a situation where the audience might well laugh at the behaviour of this woman, but in the end they would be left feeling sympathy for the plight of this human being. One interesting aside here actually is for us to wonder whether this story is actually true. We know that Eliza Donnithorne existed. She lived in Cambridge Hall, later called Camperdown Lodge, in Newtown, New South Wales in Australia. And her grave, she died in 1886 at around the age of 60, is certainly in Camperdown Cemetery under the shade of the trees. And therein lies an as yet unfulfilled ambition of mine to go there and to visit Miss Donnithorne's grave. It has been suggested that she may have been a source for Dickens's character Miss Havisham in Great Expectations. Well, the story of Eliza, as you will doubtless all know, is that she was engaged to a naval officer, or perhaps he was a shipping clerk, or perhaps he was something else. There is definitely doubt there. Perhaps in 1856, but perhaps in 1846 or 1848. There's a lot of perhaps on the way here. But on the day appointed for the wedding, the bridegroom did not appear, and she went to live the rest of her life in seclusion in her house, Camperdown Lodge, with her wedding breakfast decaying all around her and still wearing her wedding dress until the day she died 30 years later, perhaps. Contemporary accounts certainly talk of a recluse who would only converse with strangers from behind the chained door through this small gap, and that the only other person known to be living in the house was her maid. But little else is actually known, and a sort of reverse theory about the Dickens connection is that Australian readers of Great Expectations, which was published in 1861, so perhaps only 5 years after the supposed engagement, saw a parallel in the stories of Miss Havisham and Miss Donnithorne, and the facts in the case of Eliza Donnithorne were embellished to the extent that the stories became one in a sort of collective memory phenomenon. Certainly, researchers in Australia have looked for records of banns of marriage in several parish churches around the area and have found nothing, nor have they found any announcements of any engagement at the time. And there's an interesting book called The Recluse by Evelyn Dewars, published in 2012, which is a really thorough piece of research on this subject and actually throws up surprisingly few facts beyond where she was born in Cape Town, where she lived in India and also in England, and when she came to Australia to live with her father in 1846. As I said, there were varying dates given for the date of the abandonment. Could be 1846, that seems quite soon after she'd arrived. Could be 1848, could be 1856. So, as I said, a lot of unanswered questions about the accuracy of this story. None of that makes it any the less interesting. It's a fascinating story. So to return to my preparation for the role. So I took Max's foreword as a good starting point, and I noted that he referred a lot to Victorian salon music, assuming that she would have been familiar with this genre. And there are quite a few references musically to the sentimental nature of some of the home music at that time. I don't know if anybody else has got, like I have, an old inherited copy of the News Chronicle book of music for the home, which has got sections on operatic choruses and famous arias and famous marches. And I imagine that's the sort of thing she might have had in her home. We do know that she played the piano because when she came over from England in 1846 to Australia, she brought with her a piano and a harp. I was also mindful of Max's view that her music was disturbing and that the comedy really served to highlight the pathos of her situation. In conversation with him about the piece, particularly around the time of the performance I gave at the Holywell Music Room in Oxford, which was preceded by a talk by Max with questions and answers, we spoke about how public attitudes to mental health have changed very, very much since the 1970s, so that a performance almost 40 years after the piece was written would necessarily, I think, have developed a slightly different attitude to her state of mind. Given what I've already said about my sympathetic stance to her character, I was definitely informed by this, by the changing attitudes to mental health, by my own feelings of sympathy and by Max's own feelings of sympathy towards her too. And I'd like to show you a few examples. So I'm going to screen share here. Hope this works. There we go. But I think I'm all set up. I hope you can still hear me. So that's me in Orkney, I think, singing Miss Donnithorne at the 2012 St Magnus Festival. So I've got a few extracts. So this is the second movement. In the first movement, all she does is supposedly burst onto the stage out of a wedding cake made of paper. That's quite an achievement to make. And in any of the performances I did, we did not have a wedding cake made of paper. But I wanted to show how sinuous these vocal lines, and I'm going to just find myself a laser pointer. Here we go. So I was looking at this line. Can you see how many grace notes there are? It's extraordinary how much he ornaments the vocal lines throughout the piece, Donnithorne. And maybe this is harking back to the 19th century tradition. And I was thinking this line actually without the grace notes is rather a simple melody going green, 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 moor, which is a rather beautiful lilting melody and doesn't have a lot of information about how she might be feeling, except it's a lovely tune. Put the grace notes back in and we've got green, 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 moor, and the white, white lady of, which I think is definitely more unsettling and tells us a little bit more about her. Does this embellished way of writing, is this harking back to the operatic traditions of the 19th century? Is this the Joan Sutherland element? Or is it an indication of her instability in her mind, which I think it is? And certainly the word painting is vivid. There's this lilt, as I said, but if you look a little bit further down here on the word town, there's a sort of multiphonic Sprechstimme. Now, it's pretty difficult for voices to do multiphonics unless you're a Mongolian throat singer, which I'm certainly not. But there, and he talks about breathy, I think, this is what I did. Sydney town, with sort of breathy and sort of slightly throaty. So an ugly sound. And throughout, I think you're going to find in Miss Donnithorne this duality between these rather beautiful sometimes melodies and her quasi-operatic singing, and then these rather ugly, sometimes quite brutal sounds. I mean, that's certainly not in the mainstream of vocalising that we might know from the 19th century, and it wouldn't appear in any of the salon music that Miss Donnithorne might have known. But I think it does really indicate her volatility, and we'll see more examples of that. Other vocal devices that, as I was looking through, I would like to delineate are that he uses to depict her character and her volatility and instability are exaggeratedly wide vibrato and trills. There's a lot of wiggly lines going on everywhere, like that, and an extreme vocal range, really high to really, really low. Now, of course, she's not the first composer to exploit an extreme range and very wide intervals. That's happened since Handel's time. Handel, Mozart, Webern, they've all written wide intervals to effect, to sort of enhance the effect and have the effect of heightening the expression. He also uses, though, which I think is something that we've seen in the 20th century more, a great deal of fragmentation of the text. So even there, with many repetitions of words, repetitions of syllables, and that certainly destabilizes the narrative because we've got to keep listening. What is that word? We're destabilizing. It's a device, isn't it, used by many composers of the 20th century for voice to indicate something surreal or disturbing or even comedic. And I'm reminded here of Berio Sequenza 3, John Cage Aria, which has a lot of repetition of syllabic things in many different languages, both written in the 1960s. So perhaps Max, I'm sure, would have known those pieces. I'd like to move on then to this piece, which of course looks very different because it's very syllabic, and it's called a recitative, as you see. And the words it starts with are a quote from Hamlet. This is part of Ophelia's songs, one of Ophelia's songs in Hamlet. They say the owl was a baker's daughter. Lord, we know what we are, but not what we may be. So there's a clear connection with another literary mad character here. It's a very different treatment from the last song. If you look at the instrumental parts, they've got these repeated figures, which can just go on whilst the singer is doing whatever the singer wants to do. So in this particular song, there's a great deal of freedom about the pacing. And I used that depending on how big a stage I'd got. With the Holywell Music Room, I could use the whole room, and that was terrific. We also have, it's not actually on this page, but the instruments, all the instrumentalists have metronomes of the old tick-tock variety, which they set off at different speeds and at different times, which he says is meant to conjure up her disturbed state as the clocks in the house tick and chime and perhaps remind her of the passing of time. So there's a very, very unsettling feeling about this beginning of this song. And then it starts to move along a bit. And then there's a lovely moment when, one of her funny moments, when she recalls visits to the theatre and tells us she knows the works of Shakespeare by heart. This is one of the funny moments. I really like it. And Max marks here that it should be spoken like a ham, all the works of Shakespeare. And you might notice that I've written Edith Evans in my score, which for those of us old enough will know that she was a rather histrionic actress of the late 19th and early 20th century, I think. And I think this is a wonderful bit because it's got so many of these effects. He writes a lot of stage directions, mysteriously, a lot of these downward portamentos, Sprechstimme, trills with different notes, and then lots of Sprech and different sort of sounds. So I'm going to just give you this little bit, which goes, under the leaves of this dark dawning, I shall speak by heart all the works of Shakespeare. And then she goes on to something much different. Thank you, Sally. Good to see you. I'd love to go into lots of detail. There's so much. It's crammed with detail. Every single song telling you so much about the character. It's such rich writing, very precisely notated, as you see, with stage directions and character information. But actually, that gives the performer lots and lots of space in which to create her own version of the character. There's a most wonderful version in a wonderful moment in number 6, which is called Her Rant. Oh, hang on, I've just gone too far, I think. I've got to go back there, sorry. That's it. Where she really does go off the deep end into, as Max puts it, a vulgar excursion into Jenny Lind-like operatic recitative. It's marvellous. I wish I could write like that. Vocally, this section is really challenging. It's Jenny Lind, as you will know, was known as the Swedish Nightingale and was a high coloratura soprano, although Miss Donithorn is written for a mezzo. So there's a challenge already. Of the Victorian era, she was much loved by British opera goers, and I think particularly by Queen Victoria and Prince Albert. So here we have the trills, a highly decorated vocalese section, and the trills, and a cadenza, so very much in the Joan Sutherland tradition here. In this cadenza, though, as you may read here, the singer is asked to sing a high A, trilling, and waggle her Adam's apple larynx to a woman, actually, because it's only men that really have Adam's apples, but we'll let that pass, and has an extraordinary effect. So she'll sing, I'm just going to find it because I can't read it on the score. Yeah, here we go. She goes, so absolutely crazy writing, but really giving us her character. And it's come after just that ghostly, which is a little bit like a sort of theremin or an onde martenot. So many different colours. Where am I? Sorry, I've just lost my page. There we are, got it. So there we go. So the next one I'd like to just talk a little about is this, which starts with a salon piece of music on the piano. Max marks it as morceau de salon, and maybe this was one of the pieces that Miss Donithorn played. There you go. Which certainly sounds very sentimental and slushy, and maybe she, like me, plays lots of wrong notes. There's certainly some very strange chords in there, I'm not sure. But this is talking about the boys who surround her house and shout obscenities at her during the evening, during the dusky hours. And it has a really, really quite intense and quite frightening, suspense-filled beginning with these rising diminished fifths going on there. In the dusty afternoons and in the twilight. It's really, really spooky at that point, and there's not very much going on at all, just chords in the ensemble. But for a brief moment, that's all. There's the stillness and the suspense as she waits to see what will happen. But even by the last line of this page, can you see how active we are here? Huge leaps from these high Sprechstimme things and little coloratura things to Sprechstimme low ones, whistling and whisper, and getting more and more excited and fast as she goes through that bit, until she gets actually quite angry, and she says she's going to order a shotgun from London to teach them their duty just where they sit down. I think she really, really enjoys that bit. You know, she's quite indignant. Look at these stage directions: shouting, self-righteous with virtue, evil with gloating, grimacing malice. I mean, it's a gift for any performer. It's fantastic. She's clearly disturbed by their presence, though, and she listens through her chained door to them. But in the end, surprisingly becoming quite tender and maternal as she says, I think I shall adopt a little boy a little post captain of the Royal Navy, a clear reference to the man she loved and lost, with a gold moustache. So that's a very poignant moment. So this movement moves so much from the suspense to the anger, to the agitation, to this very, very maternal and loving bit at the end. It's such a roller coaster of a journey. So I've picked out so far some of the more extreme moments, but there is real pathos too. And one of the most beautiful bits, I think, is this movement, Her Reel, which starts off with a sort of a C tune, very kind of folky violin music, which convinces her, of course, that her bridegroom is coming back. And we've got the sort of echoes of Madame Butterfly. He will come back. This very hopeful, or this hark, hark, his voice. That rising fifth appoggiatura, acciaccatura, makes me think it's very, very excited. Again, without it, hark, his voice, I think just wouldn't have the same effect at all. And we've got a little bit of a recall of the first song, Bridegrooms, that lilting tune that was in the second movement. Very beautiful, that bit. But she does really quite quickly lose the thread of this and gets herself a little bit lost and finds herself wondering why she's sitting on the floor. That's a strange moment. And she posits that maybe she's had a little bit too much of the sunflower wine. And this is another one of the rather lovely moments. And you can see how Max has written the wine. Nasal, I don't think he uses that anywhere else in the score. Don't think he asks for a nasal sound at all. And of course that gives us a slightly double meaning to the word wine, because it is rather whiny with an H. So sunflower wine. And you'll see in my score I've written giggle, because I thought that was just a rather sweet, funny moment as she was slightly telling herself off for having had a bit too much wine. But I do see that you could see it in many other ways. So that's another example of how the performer is given such freedom to make her own choices in this rich and vivid writing. So necessarily in a short presentation like this, which I'm just coming to the end of, I hope I've given you a little snapshot of how the vocal writing vividly portrays the character. And she leaves the stage, scattering, after singing this rather sentimental ballad, scattering confetti through the auditorium, singing some of her trademark roulades, a la Joan Sutherland, whilst the percussionist plays a bosun's whistle, which is terribly, terribly poignant. So, thank you.
Wow, Alison, thank you so much. I wonder if you could come off your screen share so we
That's what I'm just trying to do.
Oh, right, okay.
Trying to work out how to do that. Hang on.
That's all right.
Oh no, I know. I think yes. There we go.
No, that was really, really great. Fantastic and fascinating insight into this piece. And what struck me is it's lovely to see all of your annotations on that score. And of course, we know this piece wasn't, of course, written in the end for Joan Sutherland. It was written for Mary Thomas. I suppose my question to you, what do you think Mary Thomas brought to the work? And really, I'm fascinated to know, how do you define your own interpretation against hers?
Well, I will just say that I've heard her recording, which I think is marvellous, and I was a great fan of hers. And it's very, very accurate. She's wonderful. And she has a similar vocal range to me, whereas actually when you hear Jane Manning's performances, she can get the very high notes that neither Mary or I actually have in our range, but that was fine by Max. He didn't mind that at all. But we have very low notes. So it's a quite sort of a range that really encompasses more than one vocal fach, as we might say. I think I would say I didn't strive to find any differences between Mary's performance, but I didn't see it But my feeling was that, again, I go back to this differences to mental health attitudes, that in the 1970s when she did it, it was probably, you could go a little bit further with a caricature maybe of Miss Donithorne. I'm not saying she did because I didn't see it, but you may have been able to, whereas I felt I wanted to, and certainly Max felt this too, and he said this in Oxford, that he didn't want it to be too funny, although there are certainly funny moments, as we've seen, but that he wanted the sympathy of her character and the tragedy really to come through more.
Thank you.
Not sure if that answered your question, Nick, but
no, absolutely. I think it's, that these pieces that Max wrote for specific people in mind, and Simon is one of those people. I think it's very difficult. I'm not a performer myself, but I should imagine it's incredibly difficult for somebody to come along. I suppose between Mary Thomas and even Jay Manning, there's a distance there historically, in chronologically and in the years, so to speak. But it must be quite intimidating to know that you've got those two people to look back on, and others as well. I'm fascinated to know from a performer's point of view how you kind of get over that and put that aside and come out with your own kind of interpretation. But I'm sure it's very difficult.
I think it is, but strangely, with this sort of extreme vocal writing, it's less intimidating and less inhibiting than maybe singing Mozart, because everybody's got their favourite recordings of the Countess's aria from The Marriage of Figaro, and there are not too many that you're being compared with. There's a few of us around singing this sort of stuff, but in some ways it's more liberating too.
Yeah. No, I'm absolutely right there. Has anyone got a question for Alison? Yes, Upa, hello. Yeah.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi. Thank you so much, Alison, for the very interesting talk and the fascinating performance. My question is related to the nature of comedy in this piece. You spoke a little bit about how you felt like this character you felt like some sympathy towards her. I'm just wondering, because this piece has been interpreted as comic by many scholars, as well as tragic. So I'm just wondering, why do you think this piece is slightly funny? Is it because the character is funny and ironic in some sense, and maybe even wise, like in a sense, kind of similar to George III, that her madness is being challenged? Or do you think because Davis wanted to kind of exaggerate like that, because like this character, you feel maybe she is a reflection of 19th century beliefs about mad women, and Davis kind of wanted to strengthen that with the Victorian references and with the reference to Ophelia, things like that, so that he exaggerated so much that it's kind of funny. It's like an extreme case, like if you could answer that.
Yes, also like the sort of hysterical woman and all the mad scenes in opera like Lucia di Lammermoor and so on. Yeah, I think there's a lot in all that. As I said, in the end, I think, the genesis was this, let's write a funny one. But my feeling talking to Max was, as he wrote it, and even in the foreword to the score, which is early on, that he didn't just want to make it a caricature or just a funny, or he didn't want to poke fun at her, that he had great sympathy for her character, and that certainly some of her behaviour you might call eccentric, and it is quite funny. But as I said in my introduction, I wanted the audience to laugh kind of with her, to laugh at the behaviour, but not to poke fun at the person. And that was my take on it. And talking to Max, it was certainly how he felt by 2012, I think, when I spoke to him about it a lot. But I think that times had changed since the 1970s. So I don't think he was in any way trying to belittle her, although she does do some strange things. And the gargling stuff is obviously funny. And people, when I've done performances, those are the things that people laugh at. And it's obviously meant to be funny because it's so extreme. But at the same time, behind all that comedy, you still have this view of this poor woman sent completely mad by events, which could happen to any of us. And it's just that she reacted in this very extreme way. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Thanks for your question. Sally.
I also get the strong feeling that, I mean, it was just, he wanted to write a virtuoso piece. I mean, that's what it is. It's a real virtuoso piece. And I think that she's the perfect medium for that. So I think that you know, at the end of the day, and that's, and you sing it wonderfully. I've seen you do it. So
yes,
it's a really virtuoso piece. So you can interpret it whatever way you like, but at the end of the day, that's what it is.
Yeah, very good point. Yeah.
Thank you. Are there any? Oh, Richard?
Simon, can I ask you if Max, not to put it the wrong way, but wanted you to play things in particular ways? You know, I mean, for example, we've just heard that Max, it's a performer's dream because you can interpret it in many ways. But when it came to instrumental music, Max said very early on that he didn't orchestrate as such. But then I think as he got older, he really did. He never said that later on. So by the time he'd got to the time when he was working on the pieces that you wrote, was he more fussy about his orchestrations?
It's certainly, as far as interpretation went, he was quite happy to leave it to me, the things I did with him. And also, you know, we did a huge amount of recording with him and orchestral work. And in the orchestra, if somebody had strong feelings about things, he would always let that happen. He never superimposed himself on new ideas. I mean, he was quite happy to discuss things. But I think if you felt strongly about something, you leave it to you. That was my impression.
I suppose we should say, I don't think you mentioned the saxophone, what the saxophone piece was actually.
Sorry,
it was, no, you carry on.
It was called Sales in St. Magnus 3, and it was a depiction of the sails in St. Magnus were boat sails which had been painted by local people to depict scenes, historical scenes in Orkney history. And my particular sail was of a Viking striding across the Orkney landscape, surveying it as his own. That was what I had to convey. The saxophone was, I think, it's a powerful instrument. It has no problems cutting through an orchestra. So I think he saw it as something that had power over its landscape, whereas something like the bass clarinet is much quieter, much more intimate, and is much more submissive in relation to the instruments around it. So whereas Sales was full orchestra with huge percussion, all the Max stuff for trumpets, and the saxophone wouldn't be overwhelmed by that. The bass clarinet was for a small string orchestra.
Yeah, no, thanks for clarifying that. Andra asks, is this now called Orkney Saga? It is, in fact, yeah. It was. Yeah,
he did change the name. He decided he didn't like, or something. Maybe the sales thing never came to fruition. But anyway, I think his original idea was that it was going to be one of a huge series, and I don't know whether he got sidetracked but he changed the name anyway.
Yeah,
but I've only ever seen it as Sales because that's what my score and part has written on it. You know, it's seared into my brain.
Yeah, he originally planned 14 different, well, sales, and he wrote 1, 2, 3, and then 5. I don't know what happened to number 4, but the others weren't finished either. So he only actually finished 4 in total. But one of the things I wanted to ask you, Simon, actually, I'm really fascinated by the score, and you were telling me the other day that there is a sketchbook as well that you've got that Max gave you. I think it'd be really great if we could, possibly, with your permission, sort of take photographs of that, perhaps, or scan it so other scholars can have a look at it.
It's in such a safe place for moving house. I think it's in the loft. I'll dig it out. Next time I'm brave enough to go up there.
No, that's great. I mean, I was going to say that I think Richard did a similar thing with I can't remember which piece.
The Ave Maristella, yes.
Ave Maristella, of course. Yeah, you took photographs of the sketches for that, and then subsequently that they disappeared, and I think Richard deposited those scans, those images, to the British Libraries. I'm just wondering if Andra could say something about, possibly if Simon took photographs of that, maybe he could send it to you. Is that a good idea, Andra, do you think?
I think it's an excellent idea. I think we'd really welcome that a lot, and we now have some better systems in place for being able to store them long term. So.
Could you say something about your role at the British Library, please?
Yes, I'm a catalog. What am I? Music, manuscripts, and archives cataloger, and at the moment I've just started working on the uncatalogued collection of Max's works and correspondence, which is a treasure trove.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah. I've got quite a few letters from him over the years on various things, amongst the pieces. One thing I have got that's interesting was when years ago, this must have been the early 90s, he rang up in the middle of the night at like 3 or 4 in the morning. And of course the answer phone was on. So it was in the days of tapes. I saved the tape because I ran down to the phone because you don't know whether, I thought maybe it's my mum. And it was Max. He said, "My goodness, I thought the roof was going to come off. It's the worst storm I've ever seen." He said, "I had to speak to somebody. I didn't know who to call. And he was in a real flap. And it had been the most awful night of stormy weather. And so I saved that somewhere, but it's a weird little tape about that big that nobody at the BBC could play."
No, all of those things are just fascinating glimpse into Max, the man, really, and how that comes through in his music, as well as the weather of Orkney, etc.
There was one thing I would like to just a little story I'd like to tell just before we end, which I think illustrates how genuine is the kind of the persona that he put across, how genuine it was. When it came to the crunch, this proved to me that he was fundamentally a nice guy, because it was when we recorded the Lighthouse for Chandos. I think there are only 11 players. I think it's something like 11 players, 3 singers. And we were recording a CD at the RNCM live in front of an audience, then doing a patch session the next day. We did the performance, was great. Everybody loved it. The patch session the next day, I woke up in my little Lancashire village on the moors and was completely snowed in. No way out of the village. So I thought, what am I going to do now? So I struggled down to the station, 7 miles. Eventually a train came and I got into Manchester. I got to the patch session an hour late. You can imagine the stress, the tension, you know, the Chandos engineers and producers, they couldn't do anything without me with so few players. So as soon as I walked through the door, I was soaking wet, stressed, completely on the edge, and somebody said, "Oh, he's here now, we can get going. Right, come on, hurry up, get down, get sat down. Come on, let's get going." And Max said, "We're not doing anything." He said, "This man needs a cup of tea." And he took me into the cafe and bought me a cup of tea and a cake and said, "Just take your time with that. You won't be able to play until you've relaxed." And then we started, maybe an hour and a half late. And I thought, that showed me just how genuine he was, his interest in the players.
Yes. Yes. Thanks for sharing that. And that's probably Ian.
Ian.
Thank you very much, Nick. I just wanted to go back to Miss Donifon and just throw in a few comments about the sort of instrumental parts that support. And I think it's very interesting that, talking about the comedy, I think it's very much like slipping on a banana skin, and it's a tragedy for the person who does it. And people laugh, but the person who's done it and not thinking it's funny at all, and they just have to get on with things. And the instrumental parts in Miss Donifon, unlike 8 songs, which are virtuosic and soloistic, and everything stops while there are huge instrumental solos, you very much are supporting this amazing virtuosic music for the voice. And you don't really interpret anything. You support the interpreter and basically just do exactly what it says on the page. It's really quite, in one sense, quite simple music, and it's so well written to be supportive, never getting in the way at all. There's never any sense of balance issues or detracting from the tragedy or the comedy that's going on in the voice. And as long the way that we did it in the band was just making sure that we were aligned together and not saying, "Oh, we've got to interpret this like this." There's no sense that we needed to interpret anything. It was all in the relatively simple parts compared to a lot of his other music that was written around that time. The instrumental parts are relatively straightforward, very exciting indeed, and sometimes just bursting out the virtuosic. But it's this interesting sort of supportive role, which is quite unusual in his music. And if you go back to 8 songs, and people do pair the two of them, that's much more integrated, and the instrumentalists have specific roles. But the band in this is very much this supportive thing. And as long as we are in the right place at the right time with the singer, and it says 3 Ps, we play 3 Ps, or says Victorian keyboard music or whatever, we just do it, and it all works for us, which I think is very exciting. I do remember, because of my ancientness, being at the first British performance of Miss Donithorne. I think it was at the QEH, and I don't remember an awful lot. I remember Mary in a very, very tatty wedding dress, being quite histrionic, but never playing for the laughs at all. But she did things which were very funny, as Alison did when he goes, "Ah!" It's very funny. But actually what Max is doing is portraying, the tragedy of this woman. And I do remember this extraordinary performance. I did know Mary. I used to play with the Fires and the piano ensemble at times. So I knew Mary and what she did. But this was sort of I don't know. Well, it was written so well for her that she just did Mary, and it worked really, really well. But I do remember that she didn't play for laughs, but she did very funny things. And nowadays, comedy people they come on the telly and they are laughing to make you laugh, and that's very sad. But the best comedy is when you play it straight and everybody else laughs at you. But I thought it important to say about the instrumental parts, because they are quite different. We think of things that he wrote, not long after that he wrote Ave Maris, with the most incredibly complex music. But in this, it was all about finding the best ways, and it's very characterful, but it always supports the singer. I just thought I'd throw that in.
No, thank you. I'm pleased you did, very, very much so, and some really fascinating thoughts there, and also memories of those times from the 1970s and 60s. So thank you, Ian. If there aren't any more questions, I'm just doing a scan of the screen here. I think I'll hand over to Richard just to wrap things up. But thank you so much to Alison and Simon, though. That's great.
I'm sure you'd like me to reiterate Nick's thanks to our two speakers for what they've shared with us. I mean, either of them, I could listen to either of them for a much longer time than we had available. But I think that what we've achieved here is to see it from perspective. Nick and I look at the music analytically, but we're not performers of it as such. And I think that gives us a very different perspective on how Max's music comes over, and indeed the emotional content in Max's music, which is something that a performer will pull out on an analyst. Thank you both very much, and thank you all for coming and being. I think our next, I can't remember our next one, but we'll be in touch with you in due course. Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
And goodbye. Bye.